Picture this. You're sitting in a boardroom meeting with Stefan Kaufmann, the CEO of Olympus. You know, that $15 billion medical technology company that makes equipment to save lives. He's charming, articulate, making brilliant strategic decisions. You'd probably think this guy has it all figured out. Well, in October 2024, Kaufmann suddenly resigned. Why? An internal investigation revealed he'd been purchasing illegal drugs. But here's the terrifying part. Nobody suspected a thing. The company was absolutely thriving under his leadership. They only found out because of a completely unrelated whistleblower complaint. Let that sink in for a moment. This man was running a company responsible for life-saving medical equipment while simultaneously breaking the law, and he was so good at it that nobody could tell. He was functioning perfectly in those boardrooms, shaking hands, making deals that affected millions of patients worldwide, all while living this double life. And here's what should really keep you up at night. This isn't some rare anomaly. Research shows that CEOs display psychopathic traits at rates 4 times higher than the general population. We're talking about 1 in every 25 corporate leaders showing significant psychopathic characteristics. These aren't the obvious villains you see in movies. These are the people you admire, the leaders you follow on LinkedIn, the successful individuals you secretly wish you could be like. Today, I'm going to show you why your moral compass, the very thing you probably consider your greatest strength, might actually be your biggest weakness. We'll uncover why being intelligent actually makes you easier to manipulate, not harder. And I'll reveal the disturbing evolutionary logic that explains why psychopaths don't just survive in our modern world. They absolutely dominate it. By the end of this video, you'll understand not only why the most dangerous people in your life are the ones you'd never suspect, but also what you can actually do to protect yourself. Before we dive into their tactics, you need to understand what we're actually dealing with here. When neuroscientists put psychopaths in brain scanners, they discover something absolutely fascinating and terrifying at the same time. You know those mirror neurons everyone talks about? They're basically the brain cells that fire when you do something, but also when you watch someone else do that same thing. They're like your empathy hardware. They literally help you feel what others feel. When you see someone get hurt, you wince. When someone's embarrassed, you feel that secondhand cringe. That's your mirror neurons working. But in psychopaths, the system works completely differently. They can actually switch their empathy on and off like a light switch. Think about that for a second. While you're walking around constantly absorbing everyone else's emotions, feeling guilty when you hurt someone, getting anxious when others are stressed, they can just turn it off. This creates what researchers call high cognitive empathy paired with low affective empathy. In plain English, they can read you like a book. They understand exactly what you're thinking and feeling, often better than you do, but they don't actually share those emotions. They're like emotional vampires with perfect night vision. There's another crucial difference in their prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain that handles long-term planning and impulse control. Now, you might think this would make them impulsive, but it's actually the opposite. This difference gives them extraordinary long-term strategic thinking when it serves their goals. They can maintain elaborate lies and deceptions for years without breaking a sweat, because lying doesn't create any internal psychological conflict for them. Imagine playing chess against someone who can see all your moves but feels nothing when they capture your pieces. That's essentially what you're up against. Now, before you start suspecting every confident person in your life, let me clarify something important. Psychopathy operates within what researchers call the dark triad, 3 related but distinct personality patterns. First, you've got narcissists. These are the people who crave admiration and have massively inflated self-images, but they can still form some emotional connections. They're annoying, sure, but they're not necessarily dangerous. Then there are Machiavellians. These are your strategic manipulators who are focused on personal gain. They're calculating, but they're not necessarily devoid of empathy. They might manipulate you, but they could still feel bad about it afterward. Psychopaths, however, are like the final boss of manipulation. They combine the worst elements of both narcissism and Machiavellianism while completely lacking the emotional constraints that keep the others in check. This distinction really matters because not everyone who succeeds through strategic thinking or confident leadership is a psychopath. Many effective leaders have what researchers call prosocial psychopathic traits. They can make tough decisions and stay calm under pressure while still genuinely caring about people's welfare. Here's the key difference. A tough but empathetic CEO might lose sleep over layoff decisions. They'll struggle with difficult choices and genuinely worry about the human impact of their strategies. A psychopathic executive experiences none of that internal conflict. They can implement strategies that destroy lives with the same emotional neutrality as choosing what to have for breakfast. The goal here isn't to make you suspicious of every successful person you meet. It's to help you recognize the specific warning signs that indicate genuine psychopathy rather than ordinary ambition. Here's where things get really sophisticated. Psychopaths don't succeed by being obviously evil. They succeed by identifying and weaponizing our most fundamental psychological needs. The two they exploit most effectively are our desire for meaning, what I call the heroism drive, and our need for connection or belonging. Let me show you exactly how this works with two perfect examples. You remember Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, right? Most people think she was just a fraudster who lied about blood testing technology. But that completely misses the genius of what she actually did. Holmes didn't just lie, she constructed an entire alternate reality that made everyone around her feel like heroes in a medical revolution. She would tell employees things like, "The mini-lab is the most important thing humanity has ever built. If you don't believe this is the case, you should leave now." This wasn't just grandiose thinking, it was strategic reality distortion. By positioning any skepticism as moral failure, she created an environment where questioning the technology became the same as opposing medical progress itself. Think about the psychology here. Holmes understood that people don't just invest in companies, they invest in heroic identities. Those investors didn't just want financial returns, they wanted to be part of saving lives. Her employees didn't just want jobs, they wanted to revolutionize healthcare. Holmes provided everyone with narratives about being medical pioneers while systematically lying to them about the underlying reality. The brilliant part was that she made doubt feel like betrayal. Not betrayal of her, but betrayal of all the patients who could be saved by their revolutionary technology. Now, let's look at Simon Leviev, the guy from The Tinder Swindler on Netflix. Where Holmes exploited our desire for heroic purpose, Leviev weaponized our need for exclusive belonging. He didn't just lie about being wealthy, he created an entire lifestyle of luxury designed to make his targets feel specially chosen for an extraordinary life. Leviev's love bombing wasn't random romantic gestures, it was calculated belonging manipulation. Private jets, expensive restaurants, designer gifts, constant attention. He created this intoxicating environment that made rational thinking impossible. His victims described feeling addicted to a lifestyle they'd never experienced, combined with this overwhelming sense that they were uniquely special enough to deserve it. From a neurological standpoint, both of these strategies trigger dopamine and oxytocin, the same brain chemicals associated with drug addiction. The target's brain literally starts associating the psychopath with intense purpose and emotional connection, creating a psychological dependency that's incredibly difficult to break. But here's where both Holmes and Leviev showed their true sophistication. Once they had established that psychological dependency, they didn't maintain the intensity. Instead, they strategically withdrew. Holmes's employees found themselves working longer hours for less recognition, being told they weren't committed enough to the mission. Leviev's romantic targets discovered his attention shifting to business emergencies that conveniently required their financial help to maintain their shared lifestyle. This withdrawal isn't abandonment, it's the setup for exploitation. The target, now addicted to that initial validation, becomes willing to compromise their boundaries, ignore obvious red flags, and make increasingly irrational decisions just to recapture that feeling of being heroic or specially chosen. This cycling between overwhelming validation and strategic withdrawal creates what researchers call trauma bonding, a psychological attachment that persists even when the relationship becomes obviously harmful. Now, understanding high-profile cases like Holmes and Leviev is important, but let's be honest, most of you aren't going to encounter billionaire fraudsters. You're much more likely to deal with psychopaths in ordinary workplace settings, where their tactics are more subtle, but just as devastating. Recent research reveals that 36% of workplace bullying incidents are caused by individuals with psychopathic traits. But here's the thing. These situations are rarely recognized for what they actually are because workplace psychopaths don't announce themselves by being obviously cruel or incompetent. Instead, they excel at what researchers call subclinical manipulation, tactics that are psychologically damaging but incredibly difficult to identify or prove. Let me paint you a picture of how this actually works. The most sophisticated technique is systematic relationship triangulation. A psychopathic manager will deliberately create conflicts between team members while positioning themselves as the essential mediator. They'll tell you that your colleague criticized your work behind your back, then tell your colleague that you're trying to get them fired. As team cohesion breaks down and everyone starts feeling paranoid and isolated, guess who becomes indispensable? The manager who keeps everyone together. But it gets worse. They're also masters at exploiting the promotion ladder. They might offer to help with your big presentation, then make subtle changes that sabotage your performance. When you fail, they express sympathy to upper management, while conveniently positioning themselves as the obvious alternative for advancement. What makes this particularly insidious is how organizational systems often reward their behavior. When a psychopathic manager's team has high turnover, executives conclude they're demanding high standards. When they take credit for subordinates' work, it looks like strong leadership. The very traits that make them toxic to individuals make them appear valuable to organizations focused on short-term results. Now, here's where things get really dark. From an evolutionary perspective, psychopathy isn't a bug in the human system, it's a feature. Psychopaths represent what researchers call a successful parasitic strategy that has co-evolved alongside human cooperation for thousands of years. The frequency of psychopathy, roughly 1% of the general population, isn't random. It represents an evolutionary equilibrium. If there were more psychopaths, people would develop stronger defenses against manipulation. If there were fewer, the advantages of psychopathic traits would be even greater. The current frequency represents a perfect balance point where psychopathic strategies remain viable without triggering widespread defensive adaptations. This evolutionary logic explains why psychopaths are so incredibly difficult to detect and defend against. They haven't evolved separately from human cooperation. They've evolved within it. Their strategies are specifically calibrated to exploit the exact psychological mechanisms that make civilization possible. Think about religious communities, for example. They're built on trust, forgiveness, and the assumption of good faith. By convincingly performing religious devotion, a psychopath gains access to these networks of mutual aid while being completely unbound by the moral constraints that govern everyone else. The parasitic strategy works because it exploits the very foundations of social cooperation. Trust, empathy, and moral reasoning aren't just individual traits. They're the psychological infrastructure that makes human societies function. Psychopaths are essentially social hackers who have evolved to exploit this infrastructure without contributing anything back to it. Here's the most counterintuitive and terrifying aspect of psychopathic manipulation. Trying to detect it often makes you more vulnerable, not less. When you become suspicious of someone's motives, what do you naturally do? You start analyzing their behavior more carefully, you pay closer attention, you try to figure them out. But this analytical process requires sustained attention and engagement, which is exactly what sophisticated psychopaths need to map your psychological architecture and exploit it. Let me show you how this works with Keith Raniere and NXIVM. Raniere specifically targeted intelligent, successful individuals, accomplished actresses, business executives, heirs to fortunes. Not because he thought they were gullible, but because they were actually easier to manipulate once engaged, and they provided more valuable resources. When potential recruits expressed skepticism about his teachings, Raniere didn't get defensive or try to avoid their questions. Instead, he welcomed their doubts as signs of intelligence and engaged with their concerns directly. He would spend hours providing elaborate philosophical explanations that seemed to address their specific reservations, while actually gathering detailed intelligence about their values, fears, and decision-making processes. The more analytically rigorous his targets were, the more they became invested in trying to understand his system. They would spend months researching his background, analyzing his teachings, trying to determine whether he was genuine or manipulative. But this analytical process became the trap itself. They were essentially conducting free psychological profiling sessions, revealing exactly how their minds worked while believing they were protecting themselves through careful evaluation. Raniere understood something crucial. Intelligent people's greatest strength, their ability to create sophisticated mental models to explain behavior, becomes a vulnerability when dealing with someone operating from fundamentally different psychological architecture. His targets were trying to solve a puzzle using the wrong pieces, applying frameworks that assumed everyone shares basic human emotional responses. Your suspicion doesn't make you dangerous to sophisticated psychopaths. It makes you useful. Every question you ask reveals your priorities. Every concern you express shows your boundaries. Every attempt to understand their inconsistencies provides them with a roadmap for more targeted manipulation. The most advanced psychopaths will actually encourage their targets to research psychopathy, knowing that most people will conclude they're too obvious to be genuine psychopaths. They'll make self-deprecating jokes about being manipulative, openly discuss psychological tactics, or even warn you about other people's potentially harmful behavior. This creates reverse psychology manipulation, where apparent transparency about manipulation becomes itself a manipulation tactic. So, what can you actually do about this? The first thing you need to understand is that you can't outsmart a psychopath through instinct alone. They don't just lie. They exploit your emotional assumptions about how people work. Effective defenses can't rely on gut feelings or personal judgment. They need to be external, structured, and systematic. At the individual level, the principle is simple. Trust, but verify. In professional settings, don't take resumes or references at face value. Actually confirm them through official channels. If someone claims impressive credentials, don't ask them for more details. Independently check the facts yourself. In personal relationships, don't just focus on how they treat you. Pay attention to their long-term social network. Psychopaths often leave a trail of broken friendships and crazy exes. If nobody from their past seems to stick around, that's a red flag worth investigating. When it comes to major business deals or life commitments, psychopaths create false urgency. They want you to act before you can think. Set a personal rule. If a decision involves significant money or major life changes, wait at least 48 hours and discuss it with someone who has no stake in the outcome. That simple delay can prevent a lifetime of regret. Watch for emotional mismatches. When someone's reactions don't fit the situation, too intense, too flat, or oddly performative, something's off. Also, pay attention to how they treat people they don't need to impress. Waiters, subordinates, strangers. That's often when the mask slips. At the organizational level, we need structures that reveal manipulation patterns, not just measure performance. Standard performance reviews aren't enough. Use 360-degree feedback with targeted questions. Ask subordinates directly. Does your manager take credit for your work? Ask peers. Do they share information that creates conflict between team members? These patterns matter more than quarterly numbers. Track exit interview trends carefully. If multiple employees leave under the same manager citing poor communication or cultural fit issues, dig deeper. Psychopaths often destroy workplace environments without ever technically breaking a policy. To reduce manipulation opportunities, document all major decisions, assign clear responsibility for outcomes, and build cross-functional teams where no single person controls all the information. Training managers to recognize subtle manipulation tactics is just as important as training them to recognize overt harassment. At the societal level, our protections need to evolve. Current whistleblower laws focus on financial fraud, but psychological manipulation can be just as damaging to organizations and individuals. We need legal frameworks that protect people who speak up about toxic leaders, even when no crime has technically been committed. In high-stakes industries like finance, healthcare, and education, transparency should be the default. Disclose conflicts of interest, establish independent oversight, create systems where multiple people verify important decisions. These aren't just bureaucratic procedures. They're structural resistance against hidden predators. The uncomfortable truth we need to face is that psychopaths don't just exist in our world, they systematically exploit it. Every major financial scandal, corporate fraud case, and institutional collapse can be traced back to individuals who possessed the psychological profile necessary to prioritize personal gain over systemic stability. They rise through competitive systems not by accident, but because those environments reward their unique combination of charm, confidence, and strategic detachment. By the time you're absolutely certain someone displays these traits, you've often already served their purposes. But here's something that should give you hope. Even successful psychopaths face serious long-term costs. Their inability to form genuine emotional connections leads to profound isolation. Their relationships eventually collapse once their usefulness ends or their deception gets exposed. Many experience what researchers call parasitic lifestyle instability, a pattern of dramatic rises followed by inevitable falls as their manipulation strategies burn bridges they can never rebuild. Their victories are ultimately hollow, built on exploitation rather than creation, manipulation rather than collaboration. While they may appear untouchable from the outside, their success is often an illusion sustained through calculated impression management. It's also critical to recognize that psychopathy isn't exclusively a male trait. Female psychopaths can be just as dangerous, though their methods often differ. They tend to use relational aggression, emotional manipulation, and social sabotage, tactics that are more covert but equally destructive. At the same time, remember that not every calculating or confident leader is a psychopath. Many effective individuals demonstrate what researchers call pro-social strategic traits. They can make tough decisions and stay calm under pressure while still caring deeply about others' welfare. The difference lies in the patterns: strategic manipulation, emotional detachment, lack of genuine remorse, and parasitic relationship patterns. The game isn't rigged because psychopaths are smarter than everyone else. It's rigged because they're playing by completely different rules. They exploit the fundamental assumption that everyone shares a basic moral framework. But once we understand this asymmetry, we can begin building systems that account for it. Your empathy, trust, and moral reasoning are not character flaws that need to be eliminated. They're the foundations of human civilization. The solution isn't to become more psychopathic ourselves. It's to protect what makes us human from those who would exploit it. And there is genuine hope here. In a world that's becoming more aware of these dynamics, psychopaths face a new kind of resistance. As people learn their tactics, as organizations implement better safeguards, and as systems evolve toward greater transparency and accountability, the psychopathic advantage begins to erode. Maybe we're not heading toward a world dominated by manipulators, but toward one that's finally sophisticated enough to defend itself against them. Because here's the thing, the psychopath's ultimate fear isn't your suspicion, it's your systematic resistance, and that's something we can all build together.